Hello and welcome to Microsoft's Higher Education Remote Learning Series. COVID-19 has created a challenging year for Australian universities. The impact has been so fast moving, there's been little time to shift courses online, to upskill staff, and to figure out how to deliver engaging online learning experiences for students. Join me in the next 4 episodes, where I'll be interviewing some academics from Australian universities who've been teaching via online tools for quite some time. The idea is to inspire others to help talk about some of the tools and strategies that they've been using to create rich online experiences and to have a discussion about what works and what doesn't. I really hope you enjoy the series. Hi, welcome to our fireside chat. Today it's a great pleasure that I have Gary Grant with me. He's the Deputy Head Learning and Teaching in the School of Pharmacy and Pharmacology at Griffith University. And he has a range of teaching experiences from second year to master's level students. He really has an interest in a background in analytical research, but really has developed over recent years a passion for disruptive technology in teaching and learning and thinking about the ways that we can use technology to really enrich learning experiences for students. So Gary, thank you so much for joining us and welcome.
Thank you, Travis. It's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. So maybe if you can just do a better job than I did of giving a little bit of a summary of what your role is at Griffith and what sort of teaching you do, what kind of subjects and so forth.
Not a worry. So I'm still heavily invested in teaching students at an undergraduate level. So I'm a pharmacologist by trade. So I teach everywhere from second year pharmacology all the way through to clinical pharmacology at a master's level. But my other role is an administrative role. So I'm the Deputy Head of Learning and Teaching, really orchestrating how we develop and deliver curriculum and really my strategic direction that I impart on the school is really about how do we best engage with technology to enhance that student learning experience.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because when I think of pharmacology, it seems to me to be a fairly heavy science, although I'm no expert other than going to the pharmacy. But it seems to be a pretty heavy science. I'm really interested in understanding how do you use technology. So let's take a third year sort of course or whatever. How do you use technology to engage the students? And some of that might be sort of in a pre-COVID world when you can be face to face, and some of it might be in our current climate where people are learning remotely. But what sort of technology do you use? How do you use it? And you mentioned something really interesting to me last week when we had a chat about the theatrics of teaching. You seem quite passionate about how you pull everything together and make it a real engaging experience for students. So how do you do it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've been teaching for now 20 years, and I think we're right at the very beginning of where I started that journey. I think some of the most rewarding time that I had as an educator was when I was sitting in front of an overhead projector with an ink pen.
Right.
And the pace of learning seemed to be so much different to sort of that. So I call it our hiatus period in that where we got so comfortable with throwing content into a presentation, and it became a little bit too heavy and a little bit too fast paced. And I think it lost a little bit of the like you said, that theatrics of the delivery that we should be really subscribing to be effective educators. And really that's about really controlling the pace of the learning, the level of that learning, and also engaging with our students based on their needs. And I've always been searching for tools that allow me to be able to sort of regain some of those original experiences that I had as an educator. Yeah. And I've been searching for a long time to find a suite of tools, and honestly, I found lots of disparate tools, lots of separate tools that I could use that would fulfill that requirement. But I've really been looking at how do we make sure that we keep students in one place and not necessarily overload them with too many different tools, where it's not about the learning experience, it becomes about the tools that they're needing to get familiar with, which then becomes a little bit more problematic because they're unfocused.
Yeah, there is a theory that sort of talks to that, about the cognitive load theory. The idea that when you're trying to learn something, there's only a certain amount of brain power you're putting to the Germanic cognitive load, which is when I'm thinking about pharmacology study, And then if there's too
Yeah,
many
yeah, yeah.
technology bits going on, you get all this extraneous cognitive load of how do I use this and how does this all fit together? So how have you managed to sort of consolidate that?
Yeah, look, I mean, we originally had most of our content sitting just in the PowerPoint sort of framework, and we were looking at how do we sort of repurpose that, but also manage the large amount of content that we have. And right early on, I got really interested in using OneNote, and I already started with OneNote because OneNote became a very powerful management tool for me at the beginning. I was managing my academic career at the same time as managing all the resources that I was correcting and creating. Because I don't know if it's like any of the other of you. I had a hard time trying to find files, let alone let alone deploy that to students. And OneNote solved that issue for me. And then slowly I evolved into using OneNote more effectively to actually deliver the teaching as a complete unit. That obviously became even more powerful when we started to look at using, the digital pen and having devices that allowed us to then interact with those slides. Because then once again, we're bringing back the theatrics, slowing down the pace. It allowed me to strip back content out of slides and make them very minimalistic. And then use the student conversation to be able to build and direct the learning based on their needs.
It's really interesting because it's almost like when you know, because I use a stylus all the time for presenting as well. It's almost like you get storytelling back, because you can really adapt to different things and ideas pop into your head, or something comes out of the student body or whatever, and you're able to sort of take tangents or almost take them on the journey of the concept you're trying to build, like even just putting an axis of a graph instead of the graph in, and then sort of sketching it live. Is that sort of thing you do?
Yes, and even something as simple as just a graphing exercise, right? If you think of getting a large group of students to follow you in the process of graphing up a fairly complex set of data, all of a sudden, putting the blank graph into a OneNote file, embedding that as the background, and then using a pen to build it with the students, actually giving control to those students in a collaborative space for them to add in, for example, a data point, or to work out concepts from that graph, then changes that learning again. They become more invested in it because they're following you at the same pace that they can actually manage, as opposed to what I think had become a very static learning process.
Yeah, right. And so you've started then using Teams to sort of pull not only the OneNote bits together, but other conversations and chats and SharePoint and all that sort of stuff. So I wonder if you might show us some of the things you're doing.
So I'm more than happy to show you where we're at. So the Teams environment that we had really was about trying to pull in the content that we had already created. And I have really, really big OneNote libraries of content, but I'm just going to take you through a general course that I have. We used to have all of the content of the learning outcomes, the knowledge checks and course material sitting all in this OneNote place. But it's really when we went into Teams and we started looking at trying to collate it, that we ended up building sites where we could kind of pull everything into one place.
Right.
So this is a sort of a landing page of my team site for that exact same content that you were looking at early on, where once again you have the learning outcomes. We can kind of put in calendars of events for students to direct their learning and the activities and assessments that are coming on. In terms of the modules that we're looking at, it's the ability to communicate with our students, but also to be able to live poll with them within that environment without having to jump out to disparate tools. Once you kind of have a look at the capability of the implementation or the integration of SharePoint pages inside Teams, you end up with a very visual and very powerful collating tool. So here I've got an example of the learning outcomes of a course. I've got feedback responses for this particular topic. It's the embedded files that are sitting in here. And that comes directly off the files that are uploaded to the team. So as you update those, you're also updating these. So it just, once again, it helps manage me and the large amount of files and content that I'm needing to keep updating and managing.
So that's kind of a dynamic link to the
Yes,
files
that's the
section.
embedded. Yeah,
And
it's
so if you
embedded.
update
Yeah.
that presentation, it just updates this as well.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, sweet.
Coupled with the knowledge checks right at that point of learning,
Okay.
the immediate feedback on that knowledge check. So you'll see the number of responses sitting in here, so that the students get that immediacy of that need, that they want to know where they're getting it right, where they're getting it wrong, and then even just having the workshop activities inside here. So I've really found that together with the communication channel that sits within Teams, you really are taking what are very effective and powerful tools on their own and being able to pull them into the single environment to focus their learning. So they're not having to jump out the whole time. It's all inside here.
Yeah, and I imagine that's something that would really help students at the moment, because I would assume, and we see the same thing when we think about learning in high school as well, that learning online might be something very new for a lot of your students who have face-to-face contact hours at university, and although they may have done an online subject occasionally, having it aggregated or pulled together into some one-stop shop would really help them to sort of go, oh, I know where I'm going for this course, and everything's in one place.
Yeah. And I was lucky. I actually have been running a couple of courses that are specifically been delivered in Teams. So, it was when we had the decision to switch to a more online mode, those students were very familiar with the way we communicated inside Teams, the way the content had been presented with them, how their formative assessments worked, and how they got that feedback. So it really, just the switch in mode didn't really actually change their learning experience too much, because they had already had that experience leading up to a shift in mode.
Yeah, and I would imagine that for some of the academics and teachers at your university and every university, they weren't as far down the path of having that kind of platform starting to enable you to just sort of switch across in as seamless as possible a way. How have you seen that happening at the university? Some teachers or lecturers are sort of running as fast as they can to keep up and get this set up. Is that what's happening? How's it going?
I think as an institution, we've been fairly lucky in that there has been a lot of discussion around how we effectively use something like Teams as a teaching tool as part of our digital first strategy. So, there was a significant amount of training already available.
Right.
A lot of trainers willing to obviously upskill staff very, very quickly, and the uptake from staff has been incredible, particularly within our own school. The capability within the staff accelerated so much since all of this has happened, and I guess it's the legacy following this that will be the telling point, because I think it's added significantly more to the student experience. Because these are tools that they're not going to just sit within an academic environment. These are tools that they're going to walk out into the workplace with. I guess the other thing that excites me quite a bit is that we've had to do a lot of training with students to get them up to speed with using these tools for learning. But if we've got a lot more students coming in from a high school level into university, really we're going to be able to propagate that skill set all the way through university to the workplace. And that does excite me.
Yeah, no, that would be good. That'd take a load off, right? If there was students coming in prepared with this kind of technology, and then at the flow on too, as you say, to the workplace, when they come out of university with these kinds of skills, to be able to go into workplace productivity tools and use things like Teams in whatever format that they're going into. The other thing, while we're talking about workplaces that you've been involved in and you're doing at the university, is around the PD for practitioners stuff. So I just wanted to talk. I just wanted to talk about that for a second.
Absolutely.
About how what does that mean? Micro-credentialing is kind of a big thing now, and universities are thinking about how they do that differently. How does that work for you?
Yeah, so look, we're in the process of developing a micro-credential course for pharmacology for practitioners in allied health. There's been quite a bit of interest in us developing these, and it really creates sort of bite-sized learning opportunities for very busy practitioners to develop certain skill sets. So it's about that enhancement of their skill sets that they have for practice. So really, we've been looking at using the same sets of tools, much like what I've shown you, to be able to create learning experiences that are independent, but also that can be consumed within short periods of time. And they work through those modules, they complete the assessments that are attached to them, and they accumulate all of that towards potentially the attainment of a digital badge or the attainment of eventually a course. That also fulfills some of their professional development requirements that they have for their profession within that year.
Yeah, interesting. And it's good to see that technology would be able to sort of reach out into the people who aren't necessarily officially enrolled in the university, and you'd be able to include them in it too.
Correct.
One of the other things which you've started showing there, which I'm really interested in, is that you have a sort of a work integrated learning part of the courses that you delivered.
Absolutely.
And it involves a like an actual pharmacy with actors and things, which has just blown my mind, because I had no idea that this is the way you teach it normally. So I'd love you to describe what that is pre-COVID. How did you do that in reality, and then how do you do it now using technology, or how do you give students an experience of that?
Look, I mean, we have placements that are orientation based, so orientating people to the workplace right at a very early level, and this is just one of the environments that we've been able to capture, and this would be a hospital pharmacy, a virtual hospital pharmacy. We can kind of walk through these environments and actually converse with students around what they're seeing, launch things like polls with them, where there is an activity that we want to focus attention on. So we've got an activity coming up where students will be talking about the ethics and legalities of the workplace inside one of these virtual environments. But the other things that we also have is the more latest simulated learning activity. Excuse the large number of teams that I have, but I'll walk you into this is our PharmG environment. This is a 13-day learning experience, a simulated learning experience that we physically build that has a virtual element to it. So it's much like a mixed reality activity. So students will play pharmacy for 13 full days. They have a full script load. They manage the pharmacy. They have actors and simulated patients, which are actors that come in. They play the patient, and as a result of the interactions that they have and all of the clinical activities that they do, they either gain patients or they lose patients or they stay the same. So I can kind of show you how the scoring system works, but our students will sort of come in, and this is from last year. This is the overall scoring system, and it kind of, there is a leaderboard. Students either win or they lose, which is an interesting concept in education.
It is,
because it's quite competitive, and it raises some interesting challenges for students that they need to sort of manage, which are pertinent to the workplace.
They are.
But we've delivered this in two iterations now inside Teams, primarily for the communication and embedding some of the activities inside it. So, for example, we needed to solve a problem. They needed a stock, they needed pharmacy stock, they needed fridges, they needed safes, they needed stock within those environments. And we actually turned to something like OneNote to be able to do that. I'm just going to pull up my air server quickly, and I'll show you how some of that will work. So this is actually a safe, which would be printed.
Before you went to technology to do this, did you actually physically build a space and like literal human actors walked in? Is that what happened?
We actually still build that space. So we actually rent out a fairly large hall. Inside that hall, we build 8 pharmacies, and we embed it with computers and label printers, and so there's a physical presence to them occupying, and it's actually got a town square, and we've got a grassed area and
sounds
seats
awesome
for them to. It's a big investment from the school, but from an employer perspective and from a graduate perspective, the learning that they gain through this sort of capstone event is phenomenal. It challenges students in so many different ways that you can't really get in traditional assessment. It's that high level capability and competency that you're tapping into.
So normally they would be in that physical space, but now
Correct,
what you're showing us in this OneNote is how you kind of mirror that experience in digital land.
Yeah, so in that mixed reality that we created, we would have a printed version of the safe on a wall, and they would be object recognized to open up a safe on a device, on a handheld device.
Right.
And inside that would be the stock that they would need to manage. So there would be physical products, there would be barcodes, so they could scan those barcodes, and that would go into the dispensing system. So that mix between the virtual and the real, although it's a very simple exercise without things like augmented reality headwear, we could manage large numbers of students. This is managing a group of around 80 inside that virtual environment. And that would include things like safes, and I'd go along with my pen, and I would indicate on here really what's happening to the temperature. The temperature's gone out, and students would have to respond to a breach in temperature in their safe, and which products would have to be lost and which one would be able to be retained. So we'd have disaster day, for example, and stuff would go wrong, and students would have to manage.
Is that your favorite day in a Monty Burns kind of way?
It's definitely my colleagues. I run this with a colleague called Denise Hope, and yes, that's by far, I think, her most favorite part of it. She's the game master.
Yeah, great. And so show us a few more. So embedded in your team, you've got those three-dimensional, those 360 sort of view walkthroughs of the pharmacy. So they're obviously filmed in an actual space, or photographs are taken. Yes. Then you just embed them across the top, and so show us again a couple of those.
Yeah, so I can take you back to that primary one, which is that hospital pharmacy. So that hospital pharmacy that I'm showing you really is a 360 panoramic shoot by a local company. We work with a local company going into different sectors, taking 360 panos of that in walkthrough from the facility, which gives us then the ability to kind of navigate through and then also walk through that facility, so you can kind of track through it. So we've done the same for ambulances, pathology, almost the whole journey through ED into the hospital wards, out the other side, even to a patient's home. So that's really our first step in being able to expose them to the environments, and it's really a conversation with the learner around what were they seeing. So very orientating. What we can do is obviously mixed reality inside it, where there's a lot more activity over it.
Yeah. The interesting thing for me too is how, when you physically have the space, you obviously have actors who can walk in and ask questions or pretend that they've got some ailment. How do you do that in this environment, or how have you mirrored some of that?
Well, the next iteration of the game is in September, so that's when we run the game, and we will look to bring those people in within the Teams environment. So inside the game that we play, Teams is really the primary communication tool that we have for both phone calls, text chat, and our patients will merely dial into those pharmacies in the chat function of a particular team, and the students will be able to do their interview, their conversation, their diagnosis, their management of those patients as part of a Teams chat. And then the patient will move on to the next person, and off we go. I mean, we were planning for the use of telepresence robotics in the next iteration of the game. So we did have a couple of telepresence robots that have been ordered for September. But really, we get that same experience inside, just like we're talking right now.
Yeah, interesting. Feel free to stop sharing your screen. And I'm interested in what do you think? Let's assume, touch wood, that we all sort of can resume some sort of sense of normality in the coming months, and students can come back to university, and you can have these sort of real experiences with kids, with students. What other things do you think, what might we learn from the experiences that you're having right now and you're creating right now that you think might remain or be flowovers into what the new reality is after this? What do you reckon?
Oh, look, I think, just talking from my own personal experiences, I don't think I'll ever teach the same ever again.
Yeah, right.
I think I've found so many new ways to engage students in a virtual space that doesn't require physical venue. You probably even wouldn't get the same experience in a physical venue. I found actually having presenting in this way to my students with a pen and a digital device,
Yeah,
a far more effective and less complicated way to engage students,
right.
because I can operate a chat function at the same time as teaching with a more interactive approach, and I think those learnings have gone further than just me. There are other people that are learning very similar things that have adopted the same sort of technologies, and they push
Mm,
them forward in a very similar way. So
yeah,
it's really it's spreading through I guess the entire institution, definitely within our school.
yeah. It's fascinating to see the amount of challenges this is throwing up for
Mm.
for you to think about how you would turn a physical building of 8 pharmacies, artificial pharmacies with all the equipment into some sort of virtual environment is just, I mean, that's just a massive problem to solve, which you
Yeah.
seem to have done an amazing job of doing. There must be sort of problem solving like this happening all the time with lots of different disciplines inside universities.
All I can say from my current experience is that this thing has created, it's really sparked ingenuity, creativity.
Right. Yeah.
Generally the conversations I have will be, we cannot do it. It's not possible. We'll have to think about moving it, canceling it.
Yeah.
And that generally is a once-off conversation when we initiate it. About 2 days later, you start to get a couple of the staff coming through and going, actually, I think I found a way. And then all of a
Yeah.
sudden you go, actually, then there's an entire chorus of people going, yeah, no, we can definitely do this. And then all of a
Yeah.
sudden we're actually doing it.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many activities have worked out that way. And at the end of it, that conversation usually ends up with me saying, well, why is it only for now?
Yeah.
This is not a patch job. This
Yeah.
is something that we should actually have always done, and we should
Yeah.
continue to do.
Yeah.
And usually there's a consensus there that goes, yeah,
Mm.
that actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, no, Gary, it's absolutely fascinating to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time to have a bit of a chat and a bit of a walk through some of the ways that you've been creatively thinking about how to, mirror that quite hands-on learning experience with your students through your work at Griffith. So thank you so much, and I look forward to
Thank
chatting
you,
to you again.
Travis. No worries. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.